Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you to Miroslav and his team for organizing, and it is a pleasure to be here and to be able to deliver this talk to you this morning on metal and religion from a study of religion point of view as I see it. And so I tried to put together a lecture that will provide something to all of you, whether you've been in metal and religion studies for quite a while, or whether you're new to the field, or whether you are thinking perhaps of going into the field. The arguments I will be making are, in the end, quite simple. Now, just a few words about myself that might help you get a better idea of how I approach the subject and the direction that I'm coming from. Now, as you probably know, I've done a fair amount of work on metal and religion in the past, and especially on the case of Christian metal. But I'm not primarily a scholar of metal music, or at least I don't regard myself as one. I see myself first and foremost as a sociologist of religion, who studies the changing character of religious life and practice throughout the Western world in particular. And as part of that, I have for a long time now researched how religion interacts with various types of mass-mediated popular culture, and I've been focusing mainly on popular music. And metal is certainly highly interesting from a study of religion point of view. And it is so for a large variety of different reasons. Not least, it's because metal has displayed a strong and consistent interest in certain types of religious notions, ideas, and symbolism ever since its initial emergence in the early 1970s. Because nowhere else throughout the entire world of Western popular music is the presence of religious themes so evident and so explicit as it continues to be in metal. But when we're talking about metal and religion, we're not talking about just any religious notions or any types of religious themes. Rather, we are talking about a quite particular set of notions and ideas that we can locate on the darker end of the spectrum of what we conventionally consider to be religion and religious practice and religious expression. And so we're talking, of course, about the apocalyptic visions of the Bible, the occult, and Western esotericism, and especially of the so-called left-hand path variety. We're also talking about paganism, of course, usually of either Germanic or Norse kind. And of course, we're talking about Satanism, which continues to shock people and also continues to capture the attention of many scholars of metal and religion, as can also be seen in the presentations here at this conference. And by now, these darker types of religious themes and religion-related ideas, they have become part of the defining characteristics of metal as a genre, part of the defining characteristics of metal as a whole. And this, of course, has had its consequences. It has made metal into one of the most, if not the most, debated and controversial form of popular music in history. Now, the metal-related Satanism scares of the early 80s and mid-80s also, of course, and early 1990s, I should say, they seem to have largely abated by now. But nonetheless, metal remains controversial throughout many parts of the world, and especially in countries where religion continues to occupy a central role in social and cultural and also political life more generally. And so, for example, more recently we have seen quite strong opposition to metal, often religiously motivated opposition to metal in Muslim-majority countries such as Egypt, Indonesia, and Iran, to name just a few. But religiously motivated resistance against metal has persisted elsewhere as well, and has been around in many parts of the world, even here in the Czech Republic and in neighboring Slovakia, as Miroslav's research has shown. Now, for all of these reasons, and many more, metal remains a highly interesting topic from a study of religion point of view. And as this conference clearly shows, scholarly interest in the topic is also growing, and this is, of course, a very welcome development. But as a subfield, or more specific area of scholarship, like metal and religion, when that grows, it necessarily also becomes more diverse. Not only with regards to its focus and its cases, but also with regards to its approaches, its perspectives, its theoretical frames, its methods, and so on. And so as scholars of interdisciplinary research on metal and religion, we are all required to engage critically with the core and most central category of that combination, metal and religion. So we are required to engage critically with the notion and category of religion. And of course, not all scholars of metal and religion have a background in the study of religion, like I, for example, do, and many of us here also do. But the study of religion, is nevertheless the field where critical debates on the very category of religion mainly occur, and have occurred in the past as well. And so it's important that we actively follow ongoing debates in the study of religion, and especially as it relates to how the category of religion is most adequately approached, understood, and also employed in actual empirical research, because empirical research is what we here all do. Now, in order to illustrate the importance of this, I think it's useful to consider some of the main ways in which the relationship between metal and religion has been studied in the past, and also how it could usefully be studied in the future. And so, in this lecture, I shall discuss some main, although crude, categories of religion and metal scholarship. And I will do so in direct relation to Bruce D. Forbes' by now classic, but nevertheless still heuristically useful, general categorization of main approaches in the field of religion and popular culture scholarship more generally. Now, Forbes, already in 2000, he made a general distinction between what he called religion in popular culture in religion, and popular culture as religion. And so, in the following, I shall situate metal and religion scholarship in these main categories and focus on what I will be calling religion in metal, metal in religion, and metal as religion. And in each case, I shall pay attention to the implications or that particular understandings of the category of religion play in the ways in which we approach and understand our subject matter, and how we analyze and how we subsequently explain it. And so, before we get into these main categories of scholarship, let me say a few words about the category of religion as I see it. Now, religion, it's a highly debated concept, I hardly need to say that. At this point, it has nevertheless become widely recognized that the category of religion is essentially a Western construct that mainly reflects a Christian, and more specifically a Protestant Christian, understanding of what religion is and what it should be. Now, this particular understanding has historically also been imposed on non-Western cultures as part of a more general and often colonialist effort to classify non-Western cultural practices according to Western standards. And so whenever we study religion, and especially when we study religion and something, like religion and politics, religion and media, religion and metal, whenever we do that, we need to maintain a sufficient degree of meta-theoretical awareness of the category of religion itself. So basically, we need to think carefully all the time about what it means to designate, to label, or to classify something as religion or religious. Now, critical debates on the category of religion are not new. In fact, they can be traced back to at least the late 1970s, if not earlier. And much of the groundwork for the debate that is still going on today, that was laid by the American historian of religion, Jonathan Z. Smith. Now, he wrote an influential and widely read book titled Imagining Religion that was published already in 1982. I don't know if you're familiar with this work. But in this book, Smith nevertheless famously proclaimed that there is no data for religion, and that constant awareness of one's own use of categories and concepts and classifications, that should comprise a scholar's primary expertise, he said, and foremost object of study. And so for Smith, the study of religion was first and foremost the study of the category of religion, or the study of religion as a mode of classification and signification. Then later in the 1990s, Canadian scholar of religion Russell T. McCutcheon, he would go on to elaborate on Smith's arguments as part of his critique of the particular understanding of religion that views religion as a phenomenon sui generis, which means of its own kind or with unique characteristics. Now, in the sui generis approach, religion is viewed as a trans-historical essence, as something that is simply, by itself, part of human nature, and therefore part of all historical times and all human experience. And because of this, the sui generis approach maintains religion is irreducible, they say, irreducible to sociological, psychological, political, economic, or any other factors that are supposedly external to it. So religion cannot completely, fully be explained sociologically, politically, economically. None of that. It's irreducible to all of these other types of explanation, according to this view. So proponents of the sui generis approach, they view religion as such a unique phenomenon that it must be studied, they say, on the basis of its own peculiar premises. Now, the sui generis approach to religion is highly problematic for a number of different reasons, and I shall not go into those here. Suffice to say that, contrary to the sui generis approach, which still continues to be espoused by some scholars of religion, and perhaps some scholars of religion and metal as well, I don't know. Contrary to that approach, most contemporary study of religion, or most study of religion scholarship today, is firmly constructionist, in that it maintains that religion can be used as a descriptive category. We can describe something using the word religion, but not as an analytical category. And so, to simplify, religion or religion-related terms cannot function as tools in their own analysis. Religion does not explain religion. And so, we cannot study religion as such. Nothing is inherently religious. Religion is not an independently existing thing in the world. But this is an important but. In daily life, people often we treat and we respond to religion as if it was something real, as if it had its own independent existence. And this is because in the Western world, at least, we are socialized from childhood into comprehending religion in this particular way, as having its own independent existence, as if it was actually a thing out there in the world. So we learn about religion in school as children. Now, regardless of our own personal connections to religion, we also learn to recognize particular places, particular spaces, such as churches and mosques and temples, as religion-related places that religious people visit in order to engage in religious practices and activities. And also we learn to associate certain types of aesthetics and imagery and symbolism with religion. And so just like politics, for example, if you think about it, in daily life, we tend to perceive religion as real, as something that exists independently of ourselves, as something that was simply here in the world before we got here, and that will remain here in the world after we are gone. Now, the basic point is this. People might not be able to provide elaborate explanations about what religion is or means to them. But even so, it's become almost impossible to imagine a person for whom the word religion has no meaning at all. Now, everybody has some kind of idea of what religion is. People don't have the same idea, though. So religion, of course, has no independent existence of its own. It's a human construct that exists in human communication and interaction. Because together with others, every day, we participate in constructions of particular versions of what religion is, what it means, what it can mean, and also what it is not, should not be, and cannot mean. But just because we engage in such collective constructions, this of course does not mean that we would all engage in the same constructions, or that we would necessarily accept the constructions of others. Now, people who are engaged in what scholars, for example, regard as religious activities, might not think that what they are doing is actually adequately described by the scholarly interpretation or explanation of themselves and what they are doing. So religion is constantly and continually constructed in a large variety of different, variously related, supporting, and also contrasting ways. And so when we recognize that the character of religion is always constructed, or when we recognize religion as a constructed category rather, then we see that its meaning is the subject of constant social and cultural struggle. And then, when we do that, our interest should shift towards the actual constructions of religion that people make in various contexts. And so, rather than trying to come up with the best definition for religion, as scholars of religion have been trying to do for decades, we should focus on what religion, so to say, is, or what it means to who, and in which social and cultural contexts, for what particular purposes, and not least with what particular consequences and outcomes. And so, more fundamentally, we need to recognize that communicated religion is the only religion we have access to, empirical access to at least. And so it's the only thing we can study. We can only access empirically what people say about religion, what people write about religion, when people describe their practices and their activities as religious and so on. And this applies equally to anything related to religion that we might want to study. Now, these are important observations, I think, to keep in mind as we now move to consider the study of metal and religion. Now, first, let me start by looking at the category of scholarship that I have chosen to call religion in metal. Now, this is essentially the study of the visibility of, the presence of, or the use of elements and notions that we would conventionally consider religious or related to religion throughout metal music and culture, such as in song lyrics, in album artwork, in live performance aesthetics, and much more. Now, this is a very broad category of scholarship, and I would say that the larger part of all previous work on metal and religion can be located somewhere in this broad category. And one particular area of focus has been on how metal bands draw on biblical apocalyptic themes in their song lyrics and aesthetics, and especially as found in the book of Revelation, and to some extent also in Genesis. Now, there are plenty of concrete examples of this, of course, and we only need to think about classic songs like Black Sabbath's War Pigs or Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast, both of which are directly inspired and draw on themes from Revelation. But I would argue that it is only with the development of thrash metal in the late 70s and early 1980s that biblical apocalypticism becomes established, like firmly established, as a central theme in metal more generally. Early and widely known examples would include Metallica's The Four Horsemen, Slayer's The Antichrist, or Megadeth's Ashes in Your Mouth, all of which, again, draw directly on the book of Revelation in the Bible. And it is also with thrash that we see such themes become established as a central element of metal aesthetics, such as in the album cover artwork of Celtic Frost's To Megatherion, the great beast in Revelation that you can see here on the screen. One of the best examples, I think, of biblical apocalyptic imagery in metal album artwork probably ever. It's a painting by Geiger, I think, so they didn't make it themselves. Now, this preoccupation with biblical apocalypse was, of course, continued in death metal and black metal, but these subgenres, they also considerably broadened what we could call the religious repertoire of metal, because in particular, they introduced a much more stronger, a much more sustained focus on Satanist and anti-Christian themes, but they also drew heavily on various esoteric, occult, and pagan themes. Now, Satanist themes, as you all know, they have been around since the early days of metal. And of course, in large part, all of the controversies that have surrounded metal have involved, in some way or other, accusations about metal bands promoting Satanism. But for many bands, Satanism simply added shock value and was mostly dabbled with in a playful way. And so, for example, early so-called first wave black metal bands such as Venom and Bathory and Merciful Faith, they all provide examples of that, and perhaps Venom provides the best example of all. But then in the early 1990s, second wave Norwegian black metal started exploring Satanism in a new and apparently at least much more serious ways. Although many pioneering second wave bands also clearly drew on elements of various strands of Norse paganism in particular. And then of course followed the church arsons in Norway, which remain perhaps the most extraordinary episode in the entire history of metal, at least so far. But soon enough, the religious repertoire of black metal was also extended to occult and esoteric teachings and ideas, and again especially to the type of left-hand path magic that is represented by actual occult and esoteric societies such as Ordo Templi Orientis, Temple of Set, and Dragon Rouge. Now, this interest in the occult and esoteric has continued to intensify, as we know, and given rise to what some call a distinct ritual black metal scene that includes bands who expressly view their music as a vehicle for the expression of occult and esoteric teachings and ceremonial magical practice. And in addition to what I've already mentioned, we have also, of course, seen the development of pagan metal that transcends metal styles in a purely musical sense, and the repertoire of which now also encompasses many different forms of paganism, including again mainly Germanic, Norse, and Celtic, but others as well. Now, all of this is obviously interesting from a study of religion point of view. And the fact that all of these developments have occurred within a single genre, if we regard metal as a single genre, that only makes it more interesting and more worthy of serious study. But as to the future scholarship on metal religion in metal, I can see both some challenges and some main opportunities or promises. Now, one main challenge, as I see it, has to do with the fact that scholarship on religion in metal often remains strongly focused on particular isolated cases. I can't speak of what you're doing because it's ongoing research. I'm talking about previous research. What I mean by this, though, is that scholars typically engage in detailed explorations, which is good, but detailed explorations of, for example, the lyrical content of one particular band or another. And this can, of course, be highly interesting in and of itself, don't get me wrong. But from a study of religion perspective, things become much more interesting if we're able to discern any type of broader patterns and trends in how metal bands employ various religion-related ideas and themes. And so what I'm saying here is that future scholarship in the area of religion in metal could usefully engage more directly with current debates in the broader study of religion. And especially as these debates unfold in subfields such as the sociology of religion and the study of religion, media, and popular culture. Now, that of course would require that religion in metal scholars, that they closely follow broader developments in the study of religion, so that they can relate their own explorations directly to broader scholarly debates and thereby also directly contribute to these broader scholarly debates. Now, let me give you an example of what that might look like, and this example might be somewhat antiquated by now, and I apologize if it is. But already in 2004, almost 20 years ago now, British scholar of religion, Christopher Partridge, he argued that the Western religious field had become profoundly affected by popular culture, and indeed become fused, he argued, with popular cultural expressions to a large extent. And so he argued, and I quote, "Motives, theories, and truth claims that once existed in hermetically sealed subcultures have begun to be recycled, often with great rapidity, through popular culture," end quote. And this development, he argued, had resulted in the formation of a new type of religio-cultural milieu in the West that is no longer traditionally Christian or even theistic, but rather occult in character. And this is why Partridge chose to use the term occulture, which he borrowed from Genesis P. Orridge, to denote this new religio-cultural milieu. And you might be familiar, of course, with this term, I bet. But now, Partridge, he also made the further argument that contemporary occulture also encompasses what he referred to as dark occulture, which is frequently sourced by Christian apocalypticism and demonology, and left-hand path esotericism in particular. And it is in this context that he himself notes the central role that metal has played in the wider circulation and indeed wider popularization of dark occultural themes. And so, in Partridge's work, what we see is how metal can be situated as part of a much broader argument on the dynamics of contemporary religious change and the contemporary interplay between religion and popular culture. Now, correspondingly, scholars of religion in metal could strive to do the same, to consider how their own research can be situated within broader frameworks of this type. And there are many who do this already, I'm sure, But I think it could be done in the future even more explicitly than is perhaps still often the case. And those who would be interested in doing that, they would also need to engage more firmly with ongoing debates on the category of religion. And here also I frequently find much previous scholarship on religion in metal somewhat lacking in this regard, in that it often tends to employ the category of religion not necessarily in a highly problematic way, but as if its meaning was somehow self-evident and straightforward. And so, from a study of religion perspective, it would be interesting if future religion in metal scholarship would focus more directly on the particular constructions of religion that emerge in the production of metal bands and among metal audiences. So, for example, just a few possible questions that could be asked is, so why do metal musicians employ religion-related themes in their music? How do they understand these themes? How do they want their audiences to understand and respond to these themes? How do audiences respond and view these themes? Is there any type of creative mixtures between different types of themes? I know the scholarship is being done in relation to questions like these already. But these then are only some of the questions that would be interesting to know more about from a study of religion point of view going forward. Now, let's turn to something quite different, the scholarship on metal in religion. Now, this is basically the scholarship of how metal music and its associated aesthetics and practices and subcultural styles enter the realm of particular religious communities and or otherwise becomes consciously adopted for some type of essentially religious purposes that is described as such. And so far we have not seen much scholarship of this kind. And that is, however, though, with the exception of Christian metal, so let me focus a bit on that. Now, Christian metal is of course part of the wider phenomenon of so-called contemporary Christian music that originally emerged as an innovation of the North American Jesus movement of the 1960s. And Jesus movement members, they were often referred to as Jesus freaks. They set out to appeal to the countercultural youth of the time by presenting a conservative Christian message through the medium of rock music. So the idea was to use rock music as a missionary tool. And contemporary Christian music would then go on to develop into a central pillar of a broader evangelical popular culture industry that was started to emerge and coalesce in North America in the early 1970s. And evangelical popular culture, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's a peculiar phenomenon, because it was initially rooted in a desire to provide Christian youth with Christianized versions of, so to speak, secular, that is, not explicitly Christian, forms of mass-mediated popular culture, such as music, film, television, magazines, everything. But in order to provide their engagements with the contemporary popular cultural environment with a theological justification, many producers of evangelical popular culture, they embraced an ideology of cultural infiltration. And this was essentially the idea that it was not only possible, but indeed desirable for Christians to adopt the vernacular of secular popular culture as part of a broader effort to redeem secular popular culture and to transform it in a more Christian direction from within. And contemporary Christian music also became strongly governed by this ideology. And so this meant that contemporary Christian music, Christian rock, Christian pop, it became understood and defined on the basis of criteria that were external to the music itself. And so, first and foremost, any true Christian music needed to convey a clear and unambiguous Christian lyrical content. It needed to be crystal clear. It also needed to be produced and performed by people who were themselves professed Christians and who led Christian lives. And it needed to be produced and distributed through specialized Christian record labels and retailers that were expressly guided by an evangelistic agenda. And so in all of this, the music itself became of secondary importance. The important thing was what the music was being used for. Essentially, the important thing was the religious or the religion-related purposes that the music was intended to fulfill. And then when Christian metal emerged in the early 1980s, it was firmly grounded in these ideals. And so early 80s bands such as Stryper, which you can see on Heaven's Metal cover here, Stryper, White Cross, and Saint, they wanted to spread the Christian message in the secular metal community and simultaneously provide Christian youth with a more morally wholesome alternative to secular metal. And then in the late 1980s, an independent, transnational Christian metal scene gradually started to develop, including its own industrial infrastructure of record labels, distribution channels, festivals, and specialized media, such as, for example, Heaven's Metal fanzine that you can see here on the screen. And overall, the musical diversification of Christian metal has largely followed musical developments in metal more generally, although usually with some time delay. And so in the second half of the 1980s, we saw the development of Christian thrash by US bands such as Vengeance Rising and Deliverance. Then in the late 80s and early 1990s, Christian death metal was pioneered by Australian band Mortification. And then in 1994, Australian one-man band Horde released its first and only album Hellig Osvart, or Holy Unblack, which marked the start of Christian black metal, or so-called unblack. And more recently, since about 2010 or so, during the past decade or so, the most notable developments in Christian metal have occurred in Christian metalcore and deathcore, and with US bands such as Under Oath, which you might have heard about, and Demon Hunter also achieving quite a degree of success in the secular metal scene as well. Now, the ideology of cultural infiltration that underpinned Christian metal in the 90s, still is no longer as central as it once used to be, but it still remains there. And in spite of its diversification over time, Christian metal has also largely stuck with its original core themes, which again, here too, is biblical apocalypticism, although in this case from a particular Christian theological perspective. The need to accept Christ as personal Savior and Christian faith and personal struggles. These are the core themes of Christian metal, have always been, and they remain so largely to this day. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with Christian metal, but it certainly sounds and looks like metal. Christian metal is metal. Yet, at the same time, it remains grounded in ideals that are external to the music as such. And that is really, from an Christian metal insider perspective, also, that is what makes Christian metal Christian. And the scholarship on Christian metal, which is somewhat extensive by now, has of course rightly emphasized this aspect. And by doing so, the scholarship on Christian metal has connected Christian metal directly to a much broader development whereby evangelical Christianity in particular has adopted popular cultural expressions and made them part of its own outlook and ways of practicing religion, ways of doing religion, as we sometimes say in the study of religions. And so when it comes to the study of Christian metal, the connection to broader developments in the contemporary Western religious field is often quite explicit. And in fact, we might even say that most scholarship on Christian metal, including my own, is not really about the music, it's not really about metal, but it's rather more about the appropriating logic whereby evangelical Protestants adopt and use metal for their own essentially religious purposes. Well, in terms of challenges, I think it's time for the study of metal in religion to move beyond Christian metal and to more systematically consider other types of cases where metal becomes adopted in order to serve some particular religious purposes. And that is, again, purposes expressly described and understood as religious by those who engage in them. Now, Muslim or Islamic metal, I don't know which word to use there, is still in its infancy compared to Christian metal or metal in general. But that would be an obvious case, worthy of further study. And I know that some interesting work is being done there already, including, I think there's a presentation at this conference about that as well. And I wonder, would it perhaps also be possible to view ritual black metal or pagan metal as examples of metal in religion? And perhaps it would, but I think one of the main challenges also in metal in religion scholarship has to do with where the line between musical and religious expression should be drawn, if indeed it is sensible to draw such a line in the first place. But generally, just as is the case with religion in metal scholarship, metal in religion scholarship becomes most interesting when it's tied directly, I think, to broader debates and perspectives on the present-day interplay between religion and popular culture. And I think, again, here also, that is what future metal in religion scholarship could usefully try to do more firmly as well. Now, lastly, we come to the third main category of religion and metal scholarship that approaches metal as religion, or that views metal music and culture as constituting a religion in itself. Now, this scholarship connects to a fairly widely employed, I wouldn't say established, but fairly widely employed approach in popular culture studies more generally, that tries to explain usually the intense communal experiences that people get from their engagements with popular culture by comparing them to the experiences that people presumably get when they engage in religious practice. And this scholarship, it tends to be strongly grounded, usually, in functionalist understandings of religion that view religion as something fundamentally social, as a force that brings people together within a shared moral universe, and as something that functions to create a sense of togetherness and belonging and shared meaning and purpose among people. But functionalist approaches are associated with several difficulties and problems. And those of you who are familiar with my previous work on metal and religion will probably recognize some of what I'm going to say next. Now, first, as to the problems, functionalist understandings tend to give the scholars that employ them the authority to determine whenever some particular social or cultural practice supposedly equals religion, and this often irrespective of how people engaged in that practice would describe what they are doing. And second, functionalist approaches nearly always raise questions about exactly how, and if so, on what basis, we are to distinguish religious practices from other types of, say, social, cultural, political practices, which also bring people together and provide them with a sense of meaning and purpose and community. Now, metal as religion arguments have been present in metal scholarship ever since the very beginning. And so, for example, we can see them already in the seminal work of Dina Weinstein. And as part of her discussion of the intense and overwhelming sensory overload experience of the classic heavy metal concert, the big concert, Weinstein argued, and I quote, that the ideal heavy metal concert bears a striking resemblance to the celebrations, festivals, and ceremonies that characterize religions around the world, end quote. Now, note the use of the words striking resemblance here. So, Weinstein then, she's not saying that metal concerts simply should be viewed as religious events. She's not saying that. Yet, she seems to argue that they share some main elements, and that they are, to paraphrase, strikingly alike in many ways. And I think that few would deny that popular music spectacles or live shows in general can and do indeed induce intense and powerful emotions and experiences among those who attend, among the audiences. And they are often deliberately designed to do precisely that. And also, popular music live performances and concerts have, in the past, often also been studied as liminal, providing liminal spaces in which audiences are temporarily freed or removed from the concerns and pressures of mundane everyday life. And it's also important to note that Weinstein makes her arguments in direct relation to the metal concert setting, where metal fans gather in larger numbers to appreciate their music collectively. So, sure, if only for purposes of illustration perhaps, we could indeed say that there are some resemblances between metal concerts and some types of religious rituals. But my question is, if we make that comparison, what does that observation or comparison help us explain? What more do we learn about the metal concert experience by comparing it to a religious ritual? Now, sure, I mean, there are many possible answers to a question like that, but answers would need to be provided nonetheless. The comparison itself is simply not enough. It explains nothing. It simply claims something. It doesn't even claim something. It just simply states something. Now, if metal audiences would themselves describe their concert experience using religion-related terminology or language, now that would be much more interesting, because that would provide or open up, to several new questions about why they do that. And for example, if they did that, could it, for example, be because religion-related terminology still provides a semantic resource that people still often draw when they try to describe intense experiences, even though they might not personally self-identify as religious at all. And this is part of what Owen Coggins found in his work on drone metal, because he found that most drone metal fans, they identified as non-religious. And yet, when they talked about drone metal and their own experiences of it, they typically resorted to religion-related language, or mystical language, as Owen put it. Okay, so far, so good. But then we also have functionalist, or examples of functionalist understandings about the supposedly religious character of metal that have been driven much, much further than Weinstein, for example, ever did. And Robin Sylvan's book, Traces of the Spirit, The Religious Dimensions of Popular Music, it's an influential book, published already in 2002. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it provides a prime example of this, and indeed a warning example as well. Because in this book, Sylvan, he sets out to explore what he posits to be the essentially religious functions of popular music cultures as such, including metal. And he bases his whole approach on a sui generis understanding of religion. That is the view that religion constitutes some kind of transhuman and transhistorical essence that has its own independent existence in the world. And so, in line with this view, Sylvan treats religion as some kind of independently existing force that in the world that is is the object of what he refers to as humanity's religious impulse. And then, on the basis of this completely unfounded and unprovable claim, he then proceeds to argue that popular music cultures function as a religion for their most devoted fans and followers, in an unconscious and postmodern way, he says. Even though, he goes on to say, people do not consciously recognize it as such. Now, to me, this argument, this type of argument, is not only idiosyncratic and peculiar, it's also utterly unconvincing. Because, as I've argued in some of my previous writings, if devoted fans engage with their respective popular music cultures in an essentially religious way, unconsciously, then must we not also draw the conclusion that they then also do that unknowingly? So, how reasonable is it to argue that a popular music culture provides you with a religion, with an entire worldview and sense of community and belonging, even though you do not recognize it as such, and yet it does so? You don't know it, and yet that's what it does, according to this type of argument. And so the problems that follow from this type of reasoning, they are too many to go through here. But consider also this one objection, which is really a classic one. Imagine a heavily dedicated metal fan who lives and breathes metal culture, listens to metal all the time, attends concerts all the time, probably plays him or herself. And I suspect you might all know someone like that. You might be that person. Now, imagine that this same person is also a dedicated, devout, and practicing Catholic, and that this person expressly self-identifies as religious in a Catholic sense. So, does metal then provide this person with another religion beside the one that this person already expressly ascribes to? So, in other words, does popular music cultures like metal provide a religion for those who already ascribe to one? Does it make sense to argue that? I would say no. And Sylvan, in this book, he actually touches on some of these issues himself in a way, because he also claims, and I quote again, that the specifically spiritual and religious implications of the musical experience in heavy metal are often not so explicitly recognized and consciously articulated by metalheads. Yet, in spite of this, he goes on to argue that their experiences are still essentially religious. Now, I have to admit that I rarely single out and subject an individual piece of previous scholarship of research to critical scrutiny in a talk like this. But in this particular case, I can't resist, because the arguments presented in that book are problematic in so many ways that I don't know where to begin. Problem is also that the book has been increasingly, not increasingly, but has been influential for a long time, and I see references to this book in a lot of scholarship on religion and metal as well, at least in previous scholarship. But this critical discussion does serve one function. There's a point to it. They illustrate, in my view, with all clarity how functionalist understandings of religion, if employed uncritically, how they can allow scholars to make all kinds of and all sorts of claims about the lived experiences of music fans, and in this case metal fans, and that irrespective of how these fans would describe what they're doing or not. And so we can certainly question the explanatory and analytical value of such approaches. Because again, to simply claim that something is religious or equals religion on the basis of some particular pre-postulated definition, that does in fact not explain anything at all. That's again simply to state something. And so this is where I come back once again to my initial critical discussion of the category of religion. Because religion and metal, as metal arguments, they often fail to recognize that religion is not a thing in the world. Rather, scholars who make these arguments, and you can see that I don't like them, right? Scholars who make those arguments, they seem to think that if they can make close enough comparisons between metal and religion, then they seem to think that this would amount to some kind of research result in and of itself. But of course, it does not. And so, from a study of religion point of view, metal as religion scholarship has a tendency to fall into one particular trap. They use religion to explain metal and the experiences of metal fans, while it's actually the religion that would need explaining. So, as the main promises with religion as metal scholarship, I don't know. I mean, I guess if there's time for questions, I'd like you to tell me. Now, I don't know if I've been going slow or fast, but I've now reached the end. And I know I've only been able to scratch the surface of all of these many questions that I have raised. Now, the main categories of metal and religion scholarship that I have been discussing here, they are just heuristic tools. It's important to understand that and to recognize them as such. They're not watertight containers either. So there's plenty of examples of metal and religion scholarship that could be situated in two of these categories at once, maybe. And there's also plenty of scholarship that does not really fit into any of them. So in the future, we might want to rethink and refine our categories. If so, if only for the reason that these types of categorizations, they provide us with ways of situating our own research in relation to other research in the field. And so more generally, these types of categorizations, they serve to order the field, if you will. But whenever you order a field, you also risk constraining it. You risk, putting things into boxes where they might not fit that well. So perhaps there's a need for new, more useful categorizations for those who are interested in that type of work. We should also, as a general concluding remark, we should openly recognize that the relationship between metal and religion is highly interesting from a study of religion's point of view, from a broader disciplinary point of view. Now, this might be like a simple enough, thing to say, but I think it's perhaps worth saying nonetheless, So recognize that, be aware of that. And I also think that the future scholarship in the area of metal and religion, as I've said many times, could be more firmly situated in broader debates, in the study of religion, and especially, again, in subfields such as the sociology of religion and the study of religion and popular culture. Because metal and religion scholarship has a clear, in my view, clear contribution to make here. And engaging more directly with broader debates in the field would also provide future scholarship on metal and religion with broader theoretical and interpretive frameworks that would help us make sense of what we are seeing in the field, perhaps. Now, metal in religion scholarship could also usefully by now be expanded beyond its previous almost exclusive focus on Christian metal. And as my critical remarks on religion as metal scholarship hopefully has been able to illustrate, we need to remain critically aware of the limitations and problems associated with the category of religion. And then lastly, one more thing that I have said almost nothing about. Religion and metal scholarship could obviously and evidently usefully extend its focus beyond the Western world and beyond primarily Christian contexts. Now, much interesting work is already being done in that regard, I know. But as metal continues to spread over the globe, and as its popularity also increases in many countries around the world, new and interesting intersections between religion and metal are highly likely to emerge and develop in the future. That's it. Thank you.